For decades, the path was clear. Graduate, get a job, find a partner, get married, build a family, buy the house. Settle into the structure that every institution around you was designed to support and reward. The tax code favored it. The housing market assumed it. Your family expected it. Your social circle organized around it. The entire architecture of adult life pointed in a single direction, and the men who followed that direction were considered to be doing it right. That path still exists. People still walk it. But something has shifted underneath it, quietly, structurally, in ways that most people have not fully registered yet, because the shift is happening faster than the cultural conversation is catching up to it. The men who are winning right now, who are building the most aggressively, accumulating the most effectively, positioning themselves with the greatest optionality for the decade ahead, are not the men who rushed into the default sequence. They are the men who paused, who stepped back from the path and asked a question that previous generations rarely had the economic or social circumstances to ask honestly. What if the default sequence is no longer the optimal sequence? What if, in this specific economic moment, with this specific set of technological and financial tools available, autonomy outperforms attachment? What if the man who spends his most productive years building independently, who protects his focus and his capital and his geographic flexibility, who develops his skills and compounds his assets without the friction of premature obligation, enters his prime with a position that the man who followed the default timeline simply cannot match? Today you are going to understand exactly why this era structurally favors single men. The economic reasons, the psychological reasons, the compounding mechanics that most people are not thinking about carefully, and the honest counterweights that keep this conversation honest rather than promotional. By the end of this, you will understand not just what is shifting, but why it is shifting now, why the shift is accelerating, and what the men who are navigating it successfully are actually doing differently. Start with the structural reality of modern economic systems, because the economy that previous generations has built their default sequence within is not the economy that exists today. And the mismatch between the old sequence and the new environment is one of the most important and least discussed features of contemporary male life. Modern economic systems reward a specific cluster of qualities: geographic mobility, the ability to relocate for opportunity, to move toward the market or the tax environment or the professional network that serves your current objectives without the coordination complexity that shared domestic life introduces. Risk tolerance, the capacity to make high-variance bets on yourself, on your business, on your career trajectory, knowing that the downside is yours to absorb without affecting anyone else's security or stability. Focused productivity, the deep work capacity that produces disproportionate output in knowledge economy roles and entrepreneurial contexts. And digital scalability, the ability to build income and influence that is not geographically bounded, that compounds online without the overhead of physical infrastructure. These are the variables the modern economy prices highest, and single men, when they are building intentionally, optimize all of them simultaneously in ways that are structurally more difficult for someone managing the complexity of shared domestic life. The binary here is flexibility versus obligation. Flexibility captures upside. It means yes to the opportunity in a different city, yes to the business risk that requires 18 months of below-peak income, yes to the professional pivot that makes sense strategically but requires a period of uncertainty that only one person has to navigate. Obligation constrains all of these, not maliciously, simply as the natural consequence of two people's lives being legitimately intertwined. The more flexible you are, the more upside you capture. In a stable, slowly changing economic environment, this advantage is modest. In a volatile, rapidly evolving environment where the right move this year looks nothing like the right move 3 years ago, flexibility compounds into an enormous positional advantage over time. The evolutionary context frames this in a way that clarifies the mechanism. For most of human history, men who competed successfully before committing entered the selection process with genuine assets, status earned through demonstrated competence, resources built through disciplined effort, reputation established through reliable action over time. These men did not bond before building. They built until they had something worth bringing to a bond, and the sequence mattered because it determined the position from which commitment was made. The modern confusion inverts this sequence. Cultural pressure, the social expectation in a partnership at a specific life stage, regardless of personal readiness, pushes men toward commitment before the building phase is complete, before identity is solid, before financial foundation is real, before the optionality that makes commitment a genuine choice rather than a social obligation has been developed. The result is men who enter relationships from positions of incompleteness, who are still forming while simultaneously trying to maintain a partnership, who distribute the focused developmental energy that this phase of life requires across two projects simultaneously, their own growth and the maintenance of a relationship, and end up advancing more slowly in both. In competitive environments, delayed commitment increases dominance potential. This is not a modern invention. It is the historical pattern of men who achieved the most. The building phase comes first. It produces the foundation. The foundation produces genuine optionality. The optionality makes everything that follows, including eventual commitment, qualitatively different from what would have been possible without it. Now let's get specific about why the digital economy has made this advantage larger than it has ever been. Remote work has decoupled income from geography in ways that are still unfolding. The man who can earn from anywhere is not constrained by the residential stability that household formation requires. He can follow an opportunity across cities, across countries, across time zones, without the coordination costs that a shared domestic life introduces. He can make location decisions based entirely on what is optimal for his financial and professional trajectory. Online businesses, personal brand development, digital content, software, trading, consulting delivered remotely, all of these income models share a common characteristic. They are built in focus blocks. They reward uninterrupted concentration. They compound through consistency of output over extended periods, without the chronic interruptions that relational maintenance introduces into the daily schedule. The man building an online business who can work from 6 in the morning until noon without interruption, who can make product decisions and content decisions and financial decisions without clearing them through anyone else's framework, who can pivot the entire direction of the business in response to a market signal without a family's stability depending on the outcome. That man operates in a fundamentally different environment from one whose productive hours are fragmented by the legitimate demands of shared domestic life. Single men optimize these variables naturally, not because they are superior in any moral sense, because the structure of their daily life is aligned with the structure that this kind of work rewards. Long focus blocks, low distraction at baseline, high autonomy over time allocation, the ability to go deep on the thing that matters most for as long as it takes, without the competing priority of relational presence pulsing attention elsewhere. Financial compounding is perhaps the most mathematically precise argument for the advantage of this era, and it deserves its full treatment. Compounding requires 3 things above all else: consistency of contribution, emotional stability that supports long horizon thinking, and the absence of the disruptions that redirect capital from investment to consumption. Single men who are genuinely disciplined about finances, who are living below their means intentionally, reinvesting aggressively, making capital decisions based entirely on long-term optimization rather than current lifestyle pressure, accumulate at a rate that shared financial life almost structurally cannot match, not because their partners are financially irresponsible, but because shared financial life introduces variables that individual financial management does not. 2 people's risk tolerance is being averaged down to a level that feels safe for both. Lifestyle expenses that expand naturally to reflect 2 people's comfort requirements rather than one person's financial ambition. The emotional spending volatility that relationship stress produces in ways that even the most financially disciplined people experience. The career compromises that partnership sometimes requires. The geographic constraint, the reduced work hours, the softened professional ambition that compound over years into significant income differential. The mathematics of early investment are not subtle. Capital invested in your late 20s rather than your mid-30s produces dramatically different long-term outcomes because of the compounding years foregone. And the conditions that make aggressive early investment possible, the low lifestyle costs, the high risk tolerance, the complete alignment between your financial decisions and your individual priorities are conditions that single life provides most completely. High relational volatility disrupts compounding. This is not a judgment about relationships. It's a description of what chronic emotional activation does to the financial decision-making quality and behavioral consistency that compounding requires. The anxiety relief cycle of relational uncertainty shows up in spending patterns, in the inability to maintain the patient long horizon orientation that investment requires, in the impulsive financial decisions that stress reliably produces, in people who are otherwise financially disciplined. Emotional stability is not just a quality of life issue, It is a financial performance issue. And the conditions that produce it, the stable routine, the predictable environment, the absence of chronic relational uncertainty, are conditions that intentional single life tends to provide more consistently. Geographic mobility deserves its own examination because its value in the modern economy is specifically large and specifically relevant to this era. The opportunity gradient across geographies has never been steeper. The difference between building a career or a business in a high-opportunity market versus a low-opportunity market, in terms of the professional network available to you, the capital accessible to you, the peers you're surrounded by, and the standards they set, is enormous and measurable. The man who can follow that gradient, who can move to where the opportunity is without coordinating the move with another person's career, another person's social network, another person's family proximity requirements, captures advantages that compound over years. Tax environments vary dramatically across jurisdictions in ways that have become more actionable as remote work has expanded. The man who can restructure his geographic presence based on what is financially optimal for his specific situation, rather than what works for a shared household, has access to a category of financial optimization that previous generations of single men rarely had available because their income was geographically tied to a specific employer. International opportunities in an era where capital and talent are increasingly mobile represent an expanding frontier for the man who can move quickly, markets that are growing faster than mature ones, cost of living differentials that allow capital to stretch further, cultural and professional experiences that expand the reference set in ways that change what becomes visible as possible. Speed equals advantage. In a rapidly evolving economic environment, the ability to move fast, to reposition quickly in response to changing conditions, is itself a competitive asset. Single men who have not built the coordination overhead of shared domestic life into their decision-making process can move at a speed that simply is not available to someone navigating the same decision with two people's lives legitimately at stake. The psychological edge that autonomy produces is less visible than the financial mechanics, but ultimately equally significant in determining outcomes. Optionality changes behavior at a fundamental level. The man who is not tied to any specific geographic location, any specific income level, any specific relational structure, negotiates every interaction from a position that is qualitatively different from the man who is constrained by obligations that he cannot walk away from. He negotiates harder in professional contexts because the cost of the negotiation and failing is lower. He walks away from opportunities that do not meet his standards because he has enough alternatives that no single opportunity is irreplaceable. He takes risks more confidently because the downside scenario is one person's problem to manage, rather than a shared household's stability to protect. He filters more selectively in every domain, professional and personal, because he has the luxury of selectivity that genuine optionality provides. Power belongs to those who can leave? This is not a philosophy of selfishness. It is a description of the mechanical advantage that genuine optionality creates in every negotiation and every decision. The person who can walk away, who has genuine alternatives and a baseline that does not require any specific outcome to sustain it, operates in a fundamentally different position from the person who cannot. And that position, the grounded certainty of someone who knows they are fine, regardless of how the current situation resolves, changes every interaction they enter. Emotional control is the variable that ties all of this together, and it is the one that is most directly affected by the conditions of single life done intentionally. Single men who have built genuine routine, who have a daily structure that is stable and self-reinforcing, who are not subject to the chronic low-grade emotional activation of relational uncertainty, experience a quality of mental bandwidth that directly impacts every domain of performance, clear decision-making. When the emotional system is not chronically occupied with the monitoring and maintenance of a relationship, the cognitive resources available for everything else increase measurably. The financial decision that requires a patient long-horizon thinking. The business decision that requires holding multiple variables simultaneously without collapsing to a premature conclusion. The professional negotiation that requires remaining calm and strategic under pressure. All of these perform better in a lower emotional noise environment. Stable routine, the physical training, the consistent sleep, the nutritional discipline, the deep work blocks, all of the habits that produce compounding in the domains that matter are easier to maintain in an emotionally stable environment. They are harder to maintain in one characterized by the chronic variability that early relational involvement tends to introduce. Not because relationships are destructive, because consistency requires a stable platform and relational volatility disrupts that platform in ways that ripple across every other discipline practice. Stability fuels performance. This is the operating principle. An intentional single life provides that stability more consistently than any other available structure during the building phase. Identity formation is the deepest benefit of the building phase, and the one with the longest time horizon. In relationships, particularly early ones enter before identity is consolidated. Men adapt, sometimes in ways that are healthy and genuinely developmental, often in ways that blur the specific idiosyncratic qualities of who they are in favor of a smoother, more relationally compatible version that generates less friction. In intentional solitude, identity sharpens. The values that are genuinely yours, not borrowed from a partner's framework or softened to reduce conflict, become clearer. The habits that reflect your actual priorities rather than a compromise between two people's preferences become stronger. The vision for your life, the specific direction that makes sense for your particular combination of capabilities and ambitions, crystallize in the absence of the external pressure to make it compatible with someone else's. This is not a small thing. Identity clarity is the foundation of every subsequent decision. Career direction flows from it. Financial priorities follow from it. The kind of relationships you eventually choose, and the terms on which you choose them, are determined by how clearly you know yourself before you enter them. The man who builds his identity in solitude, who knows with genuine specificity what he values and what he will not compromise, and what he is building toward, enters every partnership and every professional context with a self-possession that cannot be manufactured. Identity precedes influence in every domain. The man who is clear about who he is projects that clarity in ways that are felt before they are understood. It changes how he is perceived in professional contexts. It changes how he is perceived romantically. It changes the quality of every interaction because there is something genuinely solid underneath it that does not shift based on external feedback. Now let's look at the power dynamics that this shift is producing at a structural level. If fewer men pursue commitment early, if the supply of men who are actively and urgently seeking partnership decreases, the dynamics of the romantic marketplace change. Scarcity shifts. What was previously assumed male pursuit and commitment becomes something that is earned rather than expected. The negotiation changes, the leverage changes, and the men who have built genuine position, who bring genuine assets to the consideration, enter that negotiation from a qualitatively different position than the man who is pursuing out of urgency or social pressure. The scarcity reversal does not require collective action. It does not require coordination among men. It is the natural aggregate outcome of millions of individual decisions, each made for individual reasons that happen to be trending in the same direction. As each man builds before bonding, as each one enters the consideration of partnership from positions of genuine sufficiency rather than anxious need, the cumulative effect on the dynamic is real and growing. The economic reality of modern relationships adds another dimension. Shared finances in a volatile economic environment introduce joint risk, slower financial decision-making, and legal exposure that individual financial management does not. In an era where the economic conditions can change rapidly and the ability to adapt quickly that determines outcomes, the financial flexibility of individual management has concrete value. The attention asymmetry of digital dating markets, the concentration of romantic attention at the top of the male distribution, and the exhausting return for the average man, produces a specific and rational response from men who process it clearly, preserve the energy, redirect it. The man who opts out of the exhausting digital pursuit cycle and reinvests that attention then into building does not lose ground. He gains it. Because the thing that makes him more genuinely competitive in every context, including eventually the romantic one, is the building, not the pursuing. Here's where the conversation requires honesty, because this is not a simple argument and pretending it is would be a disservice. Not all single men are winning, not even close. And the gap between the man who is using his single years with genuine intention and the man who is simply drifting in comfortable isolation is enormous, and it widens every year. Single life is only powerful if you are building, if the financial decisions are actually disciplined, if the training is actually consistent, if the skills are actually being developed, if the network is actually being expanded, if the income is actually growing, if the daily structure reflects genuine ambition rather than comfortable avoidance of the discomfort that real growth requires. Strategic independence versus passive isolation. These look similar from the outside in the short term. They produce radically different lives over 5 and 10 years. Strategic independence is a project. It has direction. It has discipline. It has a clear answer to the question of what this phase is for. Passive isolation is avoidance with better branding. It is the comfort of low accountability dressed up in the language of autonomy. The honest question cuts through the ambiguity immediately. Is your life measurably better than it was a year ago? In specific, concrete, observable ways? Is your financial position stronger? Your physical condition better? Your skills more developed? Your income higher? Your network more valuable? If the answer requires significant qualification, the building is not happening. And without the building, the single phase is not producing the advantage we have been describing. It is simply producing isolation, which is not a competitive advantage. It is a different kind of problem. There is a philosophical distinction that the honest version of this conversation requires making clearly. Love is not the enemy. This needs to be stated directly and without qualification. The men who are building most seriously during this phase are not building because they have concluded that love is not worth having. They are building because they understand that the kind of love worth having, the genuine partnership that amplifies both people's lives, requires something to stand on. And they are building that foundation rather than trying to construct the house before the foundation exists. Timing is everything. Attaching before building does not produce love. It produces attachment that is entangled with incompleteness. Two people leaning on each other's underdeveloped selves, rather than two complete people choosing each other freely. The partnership that forms in that context is not built on mutual abundance. It is built on mutual need. And need, however warmly it presents, is not the same thing as genuine choice. If you attach before building, you dilute growth. Not because the person you attach to is a dilution, because the developmental energy this phase requires cannot be fully deployed when it's distributed across two projects simultaneously. The building slows. The foundation that would have made the eventual partnership genuinely strong does not get built. And both people end up with a version of the relationship and a version of themselves that the building would have made better. If you build before attaching, you amplify choice. You bring something real to the selection process. Your yes means something because your no is genuinely available. Your commitment is a choice rather than a rescue. And the person you eventually choose gets the version of you that the building produced, which is a better partner than the version that premature attachment would have created. Peace as a competitive advantage is perhaps the least glamorous argument in this conversation, and possibly the most practically significant. Peace improves sleep. Sleep quality directly determines physical recovery, cognitive performance, emotional regulation, and the quality of every decision made the following day. The chronic sleep disruption that relational volatility produces is not a minor inconvenience. It is a performance tax paid daily on every domain. Peace improves decision-making. The decisions made from a stable, low-stress emotional baseline are consistently better than the decisions made from a state of chronic activation, more patient, more rational, more aligned with long-term goals, rather than immediate emotional relief. The investor who makes portfolio decisions from emotional calm versus the investor who makes them, while managing relationship stress, produces materially different returns over time, even with identical financial knowledge. Peace improves long-term thinking. Short-term emotional pressure collapses the time horizon. It makes the immediate feel more urgent than the important. The man whose emotional baseline is stable can hold a 10-year vision and make daily decisions that serve it. The man whose emotional baseline is chronically disrupted makes decisions that serve the next week and wonders why the 10-year vision then never materializes. Peace is not just a quality of life preference. It is a strategic asset. It produces better outputs across every domain that matters. An intentional single life, structured around genuine routine and genuine developmental purpose, provides it more consistently than any alternative during the building phase. Let's make this concrete, because the philosophy is only valuable if it changes behavior. Build income streams with genuine seriousness. Not one income source that can be disrupted by a single employer's decision. Multiple streams that provide resilience and accelerate the compounding. The primary income. The investment income that grows from consistent early contribution. The secondary stream that reflects a skill or interest that has market value. Each additional stream reduces vulnerability and increases optionality. Train relentlessly. The body is not separate from the financial and professional project. It is the platform everything else runs on. Physical discipline produces the energy, the cognitive performance, the emotional regulation, and the embodied confidence that determines how you show up in every professional and social context. Neglecting it while focusing on financial building is a false economy. The returns on physical investment are too high and too broadly distributed to deprioritize. Develop rare skills, the capabilities that require sustained, serious effort to acquire, that cannot be easily replaced or automated, that make your contribution in your professional domain genuinely difficult to replicate. Rare skills produce rare leverage, and rare leverage produces the kind of options that change what becomes possible. Expand your male network deliberately, not transactionally, genuinely. The men who know your work, who will advocate for you, who will challenge you honestly, who are building in complementary directions, and whose success generates opportunities for yours. These relationships are built slowly and they compound quietly for decades. They are among the highest return investments available and among the most consistently underinvested in. Protect your routine ruthlessly. The daily structure that supports the training, the deep work, the financial discipline, the skill development is not a luxury. It is the infrastructure that makes everything else possible. Guard it. Design your life around it rather than fitting it into whatever space remains after everything else. Invest aggressively during this phase. The compounding window that your early single years represent is finite. Every year of delayed serious investment is compounding foregone. The lifestyle that your financial ambition supports, not the lifestyle your current income suggests you can afford, should determine your spending. The gap between those two things is the seed capital for everything that follows. When does the transition from building to partnership make sense? Because the argument has never been permanent solitude. It has been sequence. And the sequence has a second half. Enter relationships when income is stable and growing, not at peak, at a level that is predictable enough to absorb the natural lifestyle expansion that partnership produces without disrupting the financial trajectory you have built. Enter when identity is genuinely solid, when you know what you value with specificity, when your sense of direction is self-generated and self-sustaining rather than borrowed from external pressure or romantic enthusiasm, when the question of who you are does not require a partner's presence to be answerable. Enter when discipline is automatic, when the training happens regardless of external motivation, when the financial habits run without requiring constant conscious effort, when the work gets done whether or not you feel like doing it. Because partnership will introduce variables into your daily structure, and the habits that are automatic survive that introduction. The habits that are not do not. Enter when emotional regulation is genuine, when you can sit with uncertainty without it destabilizing your behavior, when conflict does not collapse your performance in other domains, when rejection or disappointment produces appropriate emotional responses rather than disproportionate ones that reflect an underlying fragility. Enter from surplus, not from hunger, not from the anxious sense that you have been alone long enough and the social pressure is becoming uncomfortable and this person is good enough, and the timing feels right. From the genuine abundance of someone whose life is already working, who is choosing to share it because the specific person and the specific conditions genuinely merit that choice. Never enter from fear. Fear of being alone, fear of missing a window, fear of what people think about your continued singlehood. Fear is not a foundation. Strength is. Here's where we land. This is not anti-love, let that be clear. The man who builds first and chooses second is not choosing against love. He is choosing the conditions under which love can be what it actually should be. A genuine meeting of two complete people, rather than two incomplete people filling each other's gaps. This is pro-positioning. It is the recognition that what you bring to every relationship, professional or personal, is determined by what you have built before you enter it. That the quality of your choices is determined by the quality of your position. That genuine optionality, genuine financial stability, genuine identity clarity, genuine physical and emotional health make every subsequent decision better. You can chase validation early. You can enter the default sequence at the socially expected moment, because the cultural programming says it is time and the emotional urgency says it is right. You can distribute the developmental energy that this phase of life represents across the project of maintaining a relationship before the foundation that would make that relationship genuinely strong has been built. And you can spend the following decade wondering why did the trajectory of your life move more slowly than you expected, or you can build leverage first. The new era belongs to the men who control their time, who make financial decisions based on genuine long-term strategy rather than the immediate social pressure, who protect their emotional baseline and their physical condition and their professional trajectory with enough seriousness that when they eventually choose partnership, they choose it from a position of genuine strength and genuine abundance. Build quietly. Stay disciplined. Choose partnership. Do not depend on it. Build first. Choose later.